Well, Jeff, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. We got a lot to discuss today. First of all, though, I want to talk about your role with Montana Wildlife Federation. And I was telling you, Jesse Dubell has been on multiple times. He's the head of the New Mexico Wildlife Federation. So I guess this is a national organization that has chapters in each state.
Yeah, exactly that. So the National Wildlife Federation is one of the very first hook and bullet conservation groups in the country. And from there, about 80 years ago, they started state chapters. And so he's the head of the New Mexico chapter,
Mm-hmm.
and I work for the Montana affiliate or chapter. And we have several affiliates throughout the state that are just your standard, hardworking conservationists in the hook and bullet crowd throughout the state. So we've got really good membership, really good grass tops leaders, people that have been in conservation for decades and decades.
Hmm. Yeah, and I've told you I've been to Montana a couple times. One for black bear, one for an elk hunt. Love my time there, and plan on coming back to go elk hunting again in the near future. But I have never been fishing, which is what we're gonna. Well, not in Montana, right? I'm actually
Mhm.
leaving tomorrow to go fly fishing in New Mexico.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, well, it's closer to home for me.
Yeah.
It's a little shorter drive. Um, yeah, but so you have a storied history as far as angling goes. You told me off the air you've been guiding off and on for 20 years, from um, saltwater stuff to
Mhm.
other parts of the country, and now locally in Montana. Talk a little bit about where you've been and what you've guided for.
Yeah. So I decided to parlay my degree from the University of Montana into a guide career,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
which made a lot of sense to my family.
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, my first 4 years I worked up in Alaska, mostly fishing for trout and salmon. I worked at a couple lodges up there, Tick Chick Narrows Lodge and Kulik Lodge, both wonderful, wonderful establishments, way out in the bush. A lot of experience with brown bears, float planes, all the exciting stuff that Alaska provides. Then I did several years for saltwater off the East Coast, out in the Long Island area, for striped bass and false albacore tuna. It's a lot of fun, big fish, hard fighting fish. Learning the tides and currents is certainly a new thing for a kid that was born in the Midwest and pretty much only fished for freshwater species. So
Yeah.
that was a really interesting part of my career. But Missoula, Montana had always been my home base. Love the water here. Learned to fish it as soon as I moved here in the 90s. And it was just a natural progression to guide here. It was a lot better to just live where you work rather than, traveling for 6 months of the year and guiding elsewhere. So
Yeah.
I have absolutely loved guiding here. We have in the Missoula area the Bitterroot River, the Clark Fork, and the Blackfoot. Those are kind of three main fisheries. All of them are tributaries to the Clark Fork. That's the main river. Rolls right through downtown Missoula. You can go catch a bunch of trout right in downtown Missoula.
Mm.
So it's a great place. Um, and yeah, I've been fishing here for guiding here for 15 years. Uh, I would say that uh, the Clark Fork has become my favorite, but the Bitterroot was always there. It just gets great hatches, big fish. It's seen an uptick in pressure, but over these last since the COVID years, and a lot of people moving here and kind of figuring out the DIY recreation thing here. So people buying their own boats and getting after it. But
So this
that
river is
river,
big enough to you can actually fish out of a boat?
oh yeah, yep, you can
Okay.
float it in a raft or a drift boat. Darn near from its headwaters all the way down to where it joins the Clark Fork. The only thing that keeps you from floating it is log jams.
Uh-huh.
They're always every year a couple new log jams that are pretty squirrely to get around, a little bit dangerous. Some you can portage around. Some of them just basically end all floating in that stretch of river because they get just too gnarly and big to get a boat around.
So is there traditional fly fishing too, where just, dudes are just walking around in waders? Or
Oh
is
yeah,
it, is there,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. I mean, Montana is blessed with the best, most liberal stream access laws in the country. We like to brag about it. If you can park by it, if there's a bridge over it, you can access it. And
Hmm.
the beautiful thing is that uh, it is considered public land up to the high water mark. So if you're walking around, and as long as you're walking over scoured gravel or driftwood, stuff like that, that's public land and that's yours to fish.
Hmm.
And we stand pretty firmly, well, not pretty firmly, very firmly in the legislature protecting our stream access laws, because they are unique. And it's not to bash states like Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, where the law is very, very different and more restrictive. We just like what we have here.
Yeah. We
It's
have the same thing in
it's
Texas.
yeah,
It's called the Navigable Streams Act. It was passed, I think, when we became a state. I think it goes all the way back to 1837 when that regulation was enacted. Although, I don't know if you heard about this, our crooked politicians just screwed over the hunting community. So you can still access it for fishing. You can still bow fish. You can still use a shotgun as long as it has loose shot, so no
okay, no
slugs.
slugs.
But this goes into effect September 1st, and they passed this law in this last session and took away bow hunting and rifle hunting in those stream beds, which sometimes can be, a mile wide. If you're talking
Yeah.
about the Red River, well, that's a massive river, and sometimes the river itself is 10 yards wide when it's not flowing, but the riverbed itself to the high water mark is massive. So yeah, it was a bad deal, and nobody knew about it. The hunting community, all of our protectors, organizations that keep tabs on those type of bills, just got completely swept under
Oh
the rug,
man,
and we were all caught off guard. So yeah, it was
that's hard to hear, man.
fortunate. Yeah.
Losing access and opportunity like that is just a tragedy wherever it happens.
Hmm. So
River bottoms are fun to hunt too, man.
yeah.
Around here we have just great whitetail hunting on the river bottoms. Our stream access law is a little different in that you can't necessarily big game hunt in the river bottom areas, um, in that high watermark area. It's for fishing.
Hmm.
You can duck hunt upland bird if they're around and you're on public land. But if it's private land adjacent, big game is hunting is not allowed
Yeah.
with rifle. You can do shotgun with slug and bow in certain areas, but you got to check your regs before you do it just to make sure you're on the up and up.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, so in your experience as a fly, or I'm assuming you're fly fishing, or maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, that's a pretty safe assumption in Montana. I do fly fish mostly, but I grew up fishing for everything with any kind of gear. I go pike and bass fishing with gear, and I've had several clients that were each of them are actually old Vietnam vets who were physically impaired in some ways and just couldn't really stand and cast a fly rod anymore, and so they transitioned to spinning gear. So those are the guys that I would
Hmm.
allow to carry spinning gear in my snobby fly fishing boat. But
So what tastes better, 20-inch rainbow or a 20-inch brown trout?
rainbow every time. Brown trout just don't taste very good, and
Uh-huh.
quite honestly, I've never really enjoyed the taste of trout all that much unless it's smoked.
Uh-huh.
When you get them through the ice, they're a little bit firmer flesh and a little tastier, but um, I'm
I just have
usually
to
catch
ask
and
the fly
release.
fishing guides
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Like
We're
one
I
time I
mean,
was going with a guide out of Taos, New Mexico, and I'm walking behind him, and we're walking through the Red River Gorge there, and I'll say, "Dude, where's your stringer?" And
Yeah.
he's like, "Are you serious?" And I was like, "Yeah." And of course I was just joking with him, but yeah,
No,
caught him off guard.
you gotta bust us a little bit on
Yeah.
that. Yeah, unfortunately, there's enough pressure around here that if everybody kept just one fish, which is under the bag limit, um, every time they went fishing, we wouldn't have fisheries.
Mhm.
And so I am all for keeping fish where you can. When I go camping up in the mountains, I'm all about catching some brook trout or some rainbows and putting them on the fire. Um, but in our main river systems, catch and release is kind of the way to go. Even though there are bag limits, and you can keep them in a lot of cases. Um, like I said, if everyone kept one or two every time they went out, we wouldn't have a fishery anymore.
Well, our
And
fishery here that we are proud of is largemouth bass, right? We have
mhm,
Texas is known for huge bass.
yep,
And I'm on like a stock tank or something, I'll keep bass,
yeah,
but I'm not going to go to Lake Fork and, keep a 15-inch bass.
right.
Like
Well,
what's
and again, largemouth aren't all that great table fare compared to like I think y'all call them specks down there, crappies.
mm.
Um, those are great tasting. I'd catch a mess of those before I, kept a largemouth.
I like largemouth, but no, crappie are by far the best freshwater fish that we have down here, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Um, well, so I wanted to visit with you because I was reading this article. It was written by Charlie Booher in Field and Stream, and it was I guess the situation was a smallmouth bass was caught in the Bitterroot River,
Yep.
and I guess first of all, before we talk about why that's significant, what fish are native to the Bitterroot? Because brown trout are not; they're like a European species.
Correct.
I doubt rainbows are,
Correct.
but I read you had cutthroat. That's
Yes.
possibly okay.
Yeah. So our native species are in this area are west slope cutthroat trout and bull trout. Though that stands for all the fisheries in western Montana. Um, Now, the bull trout is a threatened species, and they are suffering from a massive loss of habitat, whether it's development, mining, or timber harvest. All of those things kind of over decades degraded their habitat. And so their population is very, very reduced. In the
Uh-huh.
Bitterroot, they only really exist in some tributaries and the headwaters. And then once you get to the main stem from about the town of Darby downstream all the way to its confluence with the Clark Fork, they don't really exist except for occasionally where a tributary dumps into the river. They
Mm.
require really cold, clear, and clean water. The three C's are essential for bull trout.
How
But
big could bull
cutthroat,
trout get?
oh, big, big. They can get up to 35, 36 inches,
Uh-huh.
15, 16 pounds, and they
Wow.
are incredibly voracious. They're like a pike in
Mm-hmm.
attitude. The best way to see a bull trout oftentimes is to hook about a 12 or 14-inch trout, and the bull trout will just come and smack it. They'll
Oh.
just T-bone it and eat it. And you're sitting there with a 5 weight rod and 4 or 6 pound test,
Uh-huh.
and you got this 30 something inch bull trout latched onto you like a freight train.
Oh wow.
It's really exciting. And the Blackfoot River is where you see that pretty frequently. It's a pretty good stronghold of bull trout, and they are. I gotta say, they're illegal to target in this area because they are threatened species. And if you wanted to, they're pretty easy to catch. They're very aggressive, hyper aggressive almost.
Uh-huh.
I've seen a buddy of mine hook one. He was throwing a big streamer. We fish in the springtime for big browns on the Blackfoot with big streamers, and occasionally you hook a bull trout. So he hooked about a 34-inch bull trout, and as it fought, this thing was coming out of its mouth. It looked like a white tube sock. And as we got it closer to the boat, we realized it was that bull trout's last meal, which once it got into the net, it finally puked it up. And what was not digested yet was 18 inches long. So this
Oh my god.
34-inch bull trout ate about an 18 or 19-inch rainbow, and then was hungry enough to eat a big streamer, while that
Uh-huh.
thing was still in its gullet.
Wow.
So it's a testament to how voracious and aggressive they are. They're super cool fish.
Uh-huh.
And
Okay.
then our other native species is the West Slope cutthroat, and those can be found throughout all the main rivers in this
What
area.
about largemouth bass?
So we largemouth bass exist in the lower Bitterroot due to a couple of marshy wildlife refuges that are on the lower 15-20 miles of the river. Those marshes are excellent duck hunting,
Uh-huh.
but B, they're fairly warm and they are decent habitat for largemouth. So in the spring, when everything floods, those marshes wash into the Bitterroot River, and so largemouth have existed in the Bitterroot for at least 20 years, I want to say, maybe
Okay.
longer. But they stick to the warm back channels and little sloughs. Anywhere there isn't current going through and it's a little bit muddier, weedier, warmer,
Yeah.
you'll find some largemouth. And I've actually caught them up to 4 to 5 pounds out of some of the little back channels. I know 5 pounds is nothing to get
No,
excited
five
about in
pound bass is
Texas.
respectable
It's
still.
respectable.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know you guys grow them a lot bigger down there.
But
But
if I was going to go bass fishing here and the biggest fish I caught on the day was 5 pounds, I would say that was still a good day. Like
yeah,
that's a good fish. Yeah.
it's a solid fish.
Yeah. So,
But they've always existed, or not always, a couple decades they've existed in parts of the Bitterroot. Um, but yeah, it's another species of bass that we're worried about.
yeah. Yeah. Which was what this article was about. And I guess it was on, I think it was, I read July 5th.
Hmm.
There was a smallmouth caught and netted by a trout fisherman in the Bitterroot. And smallies, I was surprised to find out they're not native to Montana at all.
No, they're not. And they were introduced in several areas by the state, our Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, trying to expand, fishing
Was
opportunities.
the largemouth introduced, or is it native?
I believe, no, they're non-native as well, and I
Okay.
think that was more of a case of bucket biology in those wildlife refuges and marshes that I was talking
Yeah.
about. Someone, thought, hey, this is swampy as all get out. I bet a bass would do pretty well in
Yeah.
here, and they were right,
Yeah. But
unfortunately.
but they've been there for a while. So the
Hmm.
smallmouth, though, not native to Montana either. So,
Correct.
which is why it's significant that one was caught in, I guess, one of the nation's most storied trout fisheries.
Yeah, and it's beyond alarming. And the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, which is our state agency, um, they did an emergency rulemaking on catch and kill for smallmouth in the Bitterroot,
Mm-hmm.
because they saw how quickly this could escalate. And the catch and kill regulation is, it's good for removing fish out of the system, but once an invasive species really takes hold, if people are targeting them um, and catching them, that means that population is pretty much there, and it's going to be really tough to eradicate them just through the public removing
Mm-hmm.
them. The catch and kill policy is more about monitoring. So make it mandatory that if somebody catches one, they kill it and they bring it in and say where they caught it, and then they can also examine the otolith bone, which is it's a fascinating thing to study. Basically, the otolith bone is like rings on a tree, and it's a recording of everywhere that fish has spent time. So
Mm-hmm.
the molecular makeup of the water that they're in is sort of recorded on that bone, and they can analyze if it's spent a lot of time in one area or another, and kind of get an idea of its history, where it's spent time over the years.
I might just take a picture and then say, "Here's the fish I caught. It's going on the grill now because smallies are pretty good.
They are tasty. Yeah, I mentioned that largemouth is not my favorite
Uh-huh.
for table fare, but smallmouth actually taste really good.
Oh yeah,
They're not as good as a crappie or a perch or a walleye, but they're darn close.
yeah.
I like eating them.
I've done a handful of boundary water trips
Mm.
in um, Minnesota and then Ontario, and you just catch so many smallies till your arm, about to fall off. Hoping once in a while you'll get a walleye,
Yeah,
but or a pike. But I mean you're targeting the smallies until you get bored with it. But as
yeah.
far as eating, oh my gosh, yeah, I love them.
Well, and you always know a good day of smallmouth fishing is when your thumb is when the skin is really raw and chewed up from lipping a
Yeah.
bunch of them.
Oh yeah.
That's the sign of a good day of smallie fishing.
hmm But so in your what? How long have you lived in Missoula?
25 years,
Have you ever heard of anybody catching a smallmouth in that river?
never.
Okay.
Never. And that's the alarming thing. Smallmouth do exist way down the Clark Fork after its confluence with the Flathead River. And the Flathead River is the river that drains all of like Glacier National Park and the Bob Marshall Wilderness area.
hmm
Um, and so it's a huge system, and that's where smallmouth were introduced about 100 miles downstream of the confluence of the Bitterroot and
Downstream.
yeah,
Yeah.
downstream. It's a warmer fishery down there. It typically, you know, it gets into the upper 60s and 70s in the summer, which is prime temperature regime for smallmouth bass. And uh, those bass have, been known to swim up the first maybe 10 to 15 miles of the Clark Fork um, above where the Flathead and the Clark Fork join. Um, Below that confluence, it's really good smallmouth fishing. I go down there quite a bit. There's huge pike. I've caught pike up to 20 pounds out of there.
Hmm.
Um, and you can catch, no shortage of 2 to 4 pound smallmouth with some occasional 5 to almost 6 pounders down there. They're big. But that first 10 to 15 miles of the Clark Fork, they're in there and you can catch them. But the Clark Fork River is a little bit cooler uh, than uh, than after the confluence of the Flathead and the Clark Fork. It's warmer down there, and that cool area is just a little bit too cold for the smallmouth to really press upstream
hmm
further aggressively. We believe that the smallmouth that was caught at the Bitterroot River probably came up from there and skipped everything in between because it's just a little cooler than their temperature regime likes. And
hmm
once they hit the Bitterroot, that lower 10, 15 miles of the Bitterroot gets warm. It's shallower. The flows in the summertime are kind of low, and it's a wide river, so it gets affected by the heat of the summer, the dog days, and
uh
it's not uncommon to see it reach 75, 76 degrees, which really does make the trout suffer, but it also is prime, habitat for smallmouth. If it was always that temperature, there's enough structure, deep holes, forage for smallmouth to really thrive in there. So not only
But
did they find that one smallmouth, but another person found a second one a few weeks later. So
caught another one.
yep. There's a
Uh,
second one reported.
so how many miles upstream did they travel?
Probably about 80 to 90.
Wow.
Yeah,
And if there's two, there's more.
that's the guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the hard part, with invasive species, non-natives, particularly in lakes and rivers, is gosh, hindsight's always 2020.
hmm
Once they're there, it's really tough to get them out.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. But can they survive there in the winter? In that
Not
where?
not easily, but there are deep enough pools where they could uh, overwinter and you know develop into a long-term kind of presence.
And
It'd be tough, but they could do it.
what is the big concern? Like, why is this article written? Why are we talking today? Why is everyone freaking out about it?
Yeah, I mean, the big concern is that they are a voraciously feeding fish, and they've found habitat that's suitable for them, and it happens to also be a world-class trout fishery. And so we're worried that both rainbows and browns, which were introduced over 100 years ago to the state, but are part of our fishery,
Uh-huh.
part of our fly fishing world. But most importantly, the native species, the cutthroats and the remaining bull trout, um, they could be decimated by the presence of smallmouth. Um, and I've caught a lot of northern pike, which are also introduced, and we tried to eradicate, but they are just here. I've
Mhm.
caught a lot of northern pike in the lower Bitterroot and the Clark Fork, and just about every one of their bellies has, cutthroat trout in it, rainbow trout in them,
Mhm.
and they feed around the clock and around the year. So, just a few smallmouth bass could really, really decimate that population of trout in the lower Bitterroot.
What is the and browns and rainbows are invasive, but they're ingrained in your fishing culture there. They've been there, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, for a century. Because when I first read it, I was like, well, so what? It's one invasive versus another. Who cares? Uh, I mean, that wasn't really my final thought, but I was like, it seems like, is it really that big of a deal? But then when I was reading about the cutthroat, and then you just informed us about the bull trout, then it's like, well, okay, now this, now I have a skin in the game, right? Because I'm a conservationist, and even though it's Montana, I'd love to come fish there someday.
You should.
Um, and then you're like, okay, well, this is a serious problem. But I think more so than, well, it all comes down to dollars, right? At the end of the day,
Mhm.
that's what makes conservation work, is dollars. And what's driving these fisheries is trout fishing. I mean, how many fly shops there are there in Missoula? How many guides
Yeah.
are there? How many Airbnbs and hotels get booked up by fly fishermen that are flocking to this historic river to enjoy what you have there?
Yeah. And I mean, all you have to do is go to our airport, which I'll tell you is not all that big, but darn near every plane that lands there from about March until October, there's at least a couple people getting off with fly rod tubes, if not a dozen or more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Oh, for
every
sure.
day. And then you drive up and down our rivers and you see license plates from all over the country. Um, our economy thrives on our outdoor recreation. It's been proven to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest driver of our economy. Billions of dollars are spent a year in Montana on outdoor recreation, and fly fishing is a big part of that. Um, our native species, we have a lot of regulations to help them out and expand their territory, or get them back into their territory that they had already always existed in. Um, but rainbows and browns are part of that. They've established themselves. But you'll find a lot of people they just love cutthroats. They're fun to catch. They're beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
They happen to eat a fly very readily. They're kind of a guide's best friend. Some days on your toughest day, you just need one or two dumb cutthroats to come and take a whack at the bug. Um, so they are, a species that we're very concerned with the conservation of. And anytime you get predatory invasive species in their habitat, it's a big concern.
Mm-hmm. Well, I obviously would prefer that the smallies move back downstream
Yeah.
for the sake of y'all's fishery. I think it's a good thing that Montana, is it Fish and Game? What is y'all's agency?
Fish, wildlife, and parks.
Well, that they were proactive in saying, hey, let's try to get ahead of this
Yeah.
by with this catch and kill policy. Let's do the research, figure out where they're coming from, at least try to understand what's going on here. But yeah, it is always concerning when an invasive comes in and changes the game. So I appreciate the time. Thanks for jumping on and just educating us a little bit, sharing what's going on. I found the article fascinating. We like to keep tabs on these kind of things, and yeah. hopefully, there's probably more than two, but hopefully they haven't, established a foothold there.
Yeah, I mean the regulations are in place to nip this in the bud as early as possible. So I have hope that we'll be able to get control of this situation and hopefully not see them establish a foothold there. But
Mm-hmm.
education is important. I appreciate you reaching out for this interview because the more people know about it, the more they'll be aware about it, and if they see a smallmouth, they'll report it and they'll get active on the conservation end of trying to fix this. So I really
Mm-hmm.
appreciate it. And you're more than welcome to come up to Missoula and hop in one of my boats and flog the water with me for a day or two if you
Awesome.
want. Yeah,
Yeah, I'd love to
come
do
on
it.
up.
I think, and one other thing to say, hindsight's 2020, but our country is just littered with examples of,
No.
hey, let's introduce this to control this, or and it's
Yeah.
like, I was axis deer hunting on Maui last April, and I look over and I'm like, was that a mongoose I just saw? He's like, yeah, we introduced the mongoose to help control the rat population, which was invasive. But the problem is the mongoose hunts at day and then rats are out at night, so they never see each other.
Yeah, I mean hindsight is always 2020, and man, like the world of wildlife introduction is just fraught with examples of
Mm-hmm.
unintended consequences.
100%.
Introduce this species to take care of that
Mm-hmm.
species, and both wind up being a train wreck. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's tough, man.
We
And
gotta
and then
learn
once
from our
those species,
mistakes.
yeah, exactly. And once those species get a foothold, and they're pretty much there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, right on, man. I appreciate your time, Jeff. I hope you have a great fall. And I don't know, did you draw an elk tag this year, or can you just? I think you just get one in
Well,
Montana.
yeah, that's another beautiful thing about
Yeah.
Montana. Everybody gets a bull tag.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't draw any of the stuff that I applied for. I got a really good permit a couple years ago in the Missouri breaks,
Mm.
and with us that spends all of your kind of points in the system for
Yeah.
getting permits. So it'll be a year or two before I get what I want permit wise. But yeah, I mean we
Right on.
got just a ton of public land to walk all over, and a lot of animals. So
Yeah.
looking forward to the
Well, I
season.
look forward to my next time up in your part of the world. So appreciate it, and like I said, have a great fall.
You as well. Good luck out there.